a massive terror attack on U.S. soil 103 years ago this month, right here where I'm standing in Columbus, New Mexico. That's coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey, good morning. I'm having a cup of coffee in the courtyard of this cute little hotel in Columbus, New Mexico, which I believe was burned by Pancho Villa, one time. So it's got some history. I'm down here for a little while reporting on the border, what's going on down here. But I just wanted to ask you a quick question. If you're watching my podcast, if you're watching this channel, and you're seeing the kinds of things that we're doing as far as helping people that are in need, giving the news, going in and giving you the straight story from on the ground in these areas like Venezuela or in Syria like we were a month and a half ago, or even here on the U.S.-Mexican border. There are needs everywhere, and a lot of people have been supporting us. A lot of people have been sending funds that we can give to people, that we can use to help the people that we meet. So you can reach through the news, you can watch the news through me, but you can reach through and touch the lives of the people that are being affected. And it's really fun, and it's becoming more and more popular. People are really liking this concept. So, but I just wanted to ask your advice on something. If you had a chance to give $5 to 20 needy people, or to give $100 to one needy person, what would be better? Because this is a dilemma that I'm facing, especially as I go back to Venezuela at the end of this week. I'm going to be giving, we raised over $1,000 the other day with this Venezuelan currency that I brought back. And, this is the thing that I'm facing. There's so much need. You could go around and you could just immediately just make a big deal for 100 different people by giving them a little bit of money. Especially in this case, when it comes to Venezuela, a month's pay inside Venezuela comes out to about $3 or $4. And so giving everybody $5 is like giving them a month's pay. But their needs are so much greater than that. And the thing that I'm struggling with is that I really believe charity requires a component of intimacy. It requires a component of relationship. And so if we don't build a relationship with the person that we're helping, how much are we really helping them? And indeed, could we actually be hurting them in some way by creating dependencies or creating false expectations or what have you? And so we've tried it both different ways. On the last trip to Venezuela, I went and I handed out just $5, $10, $15, $20 a piece to lots and lots of people who were definitely destitute and needed the help. We tried everything from buying food and giving the food away, buying socks and giving socks away, shoes, you name it. In reality, I think most of those people just needs a little bit of cash because every one of them has a different kind of need. Every one of them has their own specific thing that will help get them out of their situation. And I don't know what those things are. And I've seen a lot of cases where we give them some shoes or we give them some food or we give them some medicine, and then they go and sell that in order to get the money to use for what they actually need. And so I don't have a problem with just handing people money. But obviously, if you're going to hand people money, there needs to be a bit of a relationship component involved. And that relationship can be formed very quickly. It doesn't have to be super deep. But I ought to at least know something a little bit about them and let them know a little bit about me. In the case of giving out, the argument for giving out $100 to 5 people instead of giving $5 to 100 people is that in that case we can really get them to the next place in their life. We can really move them out of, say, sleeping on the street. we could possibly literally change their lives forever, not just for a day, not just give them a little food. You have to understand that right there, especially where the greatest need is in Cucuta, Colombia, there are soup kitchens and feeding stations that are being set up by churches that can give these people food for a day. And those people, unfortunately, very often end up being very dependent on that. And if it weren't for those soup kitchens and feeding centers, those people might be forced to take the harder steps of moving on and not just becoming comfortable sleeping on the street, eating at the feeding center, and waiting for something to change from the outside in. They may need to do some changing from the inside out. And with picking and choosing a few people that God puts in front of me, and then getting to know them and maybe employing them to do something for me. So we're giving them some dignity as well as some help. Maybe hiring a bunch of thugs to pull security for me, or like we did with these girls, having them come and help me do some shopping to take some food and diapers and things to some other families with lots of small children. I think there's a difference between saving someone's life when they're absolutely destitute and they're starving to death and they just need a cold glass of water or something, and doing that, and then on the other hand, trying to get them out of that situation for good and get them on to the next phase of their life. And so I just wonder which one of those you would prefer. And so would you leave some comments in today's podcast? Would you send me some your ideas as to which you think would be better? And I would really like to hear from you and get your input into what we're doing, especially as I head back to Venezuela at the end of this week.
I am standing here in Columbus, New Mexico, which is a tiny little town of about 1,600 people that's a couple hours to the west of El Paso. And I just wanted to point out something, that this area along the U.S. southern border has been a hot zone for a long, long time. The reason for that is obviously the conflict between the two peoples, and this border is kind of that dividing line. And 103 years ago this month, right here where I'm standing, this train station behind me was part of the U.S. military depot here in Columbus, New Mexico. And about 4:45 in the morning on March 9th, a group of about 500 Mexicans, revolutionaries, came across the border and attacked this town. 500 guys attacked this town. They started it on fire. They shot into all the buildings. They went riding all over the town and ended up killing about 7 or 8 U.S. troops and about 10 U.S. civilians in this town before they fled south again into Mexico. Now, the name of the commander of that group of terrorists was a guy you might have heard of. His name was Pancho Villa.
My name is Kathleen Martin, and the attack was pre-dawn on March 9th, 1916. And Pancho Villa, well, there's some question about whether Pancho Villa himself was actually in the raid. Some people think that he directed it from across the border, because he didn't want to be captured, of course. But what they did, you've seen the state park over here? Yeah, that hill? They swept around that hill and came into town. And some of the soldiers realized what was happening, and they mounted a counterattack. And it went on for a couple hours. You saw the people here who died, and they burned a lot of the town during that time, but the American soldiers were able to rally and drive them back across the border. And there were more Mexicans who died in that raid than there were Americans. There were scores of Mexicans who died.
During the raid or
during the raid? During the raid, and then in the retreat. We're only 3 miles from the border here. Mm-hmm. But back in those days, the border wasn't quite so formalized or material or fortified as it is now. As a general, his fortunes were waning, and he needed a victory, something to put him back in the spotlight. And also the American government had backed one side and then another in the revolution. At one time, Pancho Villa was someone that the president and the Congress looked at favorably. and then they switched to Carranza. And Pancho Villa did not like that at all, that he did not have favored view from
Interesting.
the US.
So in a way, it was, I'm going to get back at the Americans because they're not supporting me anymore.
Right, yeah.
It's a good way to get us to support him.
Yeah, right. Well, there's also some question about the Zimmerman letter. If you've read anything about Mexican history, the Germans tried to meddle in the Mexican Revolution so that the Americans would not enter World War I, that we'd be distracted with Mexico. My grandfather was part of the Pershing Punitive Expedition, which was formed after the raid to hunt down Pancho Villa in Mexico. And they spent a year chasing him in Mexico. They never found him. They never even saw him. And so they were pulled back across the border.
Did they have battles there?
Yeah, there were a couple skirmishes, yeah, but there really wasn't. The thing that's important about the Pershing Punitive Expedition, sorry, I don't mean to keep moving, okay, is that it was the first time, you see the Jenny, that, it's the first time airplanes were used in combat. And what they used them for was reconnaissance. And they weren't actually using them as weapons. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time they used, cars and trucks to move soldiers around rather than on horseback. So for a lot of military historians, the importance of the raid and what happened afterwards with the punitive expedition was that it was a chance for Americans to try out the materiel that they used successfully in World War I.
So I think the lesson to be taken from this event that happened 103 years ago in Columbus, New Mexico, is not that the Mexicans and the Americans have always been fighting, because in reality, we probably have more in common than we have apart from each other that divides us between our two nations. However, I think what we can take from that is that the political machinations of our governments cause these kinds of divisions and cause these kinds of problems. So in that case, it was the fact that Pancho Villa and his revolutionaries were supporting the Germans, our enemies in Europe, against the United States. And obviously, President Roosevelt couldn't have that. So in the case now, it's not so much that the Americans on this side of the border don't like Mexicans or don't like people from Latin America. It's not that they're racist. It's that we have instituted so many policies and programs here in the United States that people from Latin America don't have in their countries that they can take advantage of if they're able to get here in any way, shape, or form. And because of that, it functions as a huge draw that sucks people north across the border, just like it would if people in Canada were offering $1 million if all you had to do was get across into Canada. There'd obviously be a lot of Americans that would be trooping into Canada. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't help those people, but like I talked about on yesterday's podcast, that helping people is not the job of the government. Helping people is the job of you and me. The government's job is just to facilitate that by giving us an environment to live and work in where we can help each other. But one of the things that I think is important to point out is that good fences make good neighbors. And when you're talking about a major international boundary, and we're talking about literally millions of people that are wanting to come into this country and take advantage of those programs that are in place, a border like this, a fence like this, probably is not going to do it. And that's why the people that we've been talking to have been saying what we really need is a wall. We're going to talk about that more on tomorrow's podcast and give you a chance to meet some of those people. And so I hope you'll stick around. Thanks for being with us. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.